They never shouted. They didn't need to. My parents had mastered the art of silence, weaponized it. So when I told them I was in love, they simply blinked. No questions, no smiles, no interest. It was as if I had told them the weather forecast. "That's nice," my mother said, adjusting her pearl earring, never looking up from her tea. That's how it started. The quiet rejection. Subtle, sharp. My girlfriend, Grace, didn't fit their world. She wasn't born into it. She didn't wear the right names or walk the right circles, and that was enough for them to pretend she didn't exist. At first, I made excuses. "They're just traditional," I'd say to Grace. "Give them time." But time passed, and their disapproval only grew more polished. They never insulted her. No, that would be too loud. Instead, they left her off guest lists, skipped invitations where she'd be present, sent holiday cards with just my name. Each omission was a message. We see her, and we've chosen not to. Grace, for all her grace, and yes, her name fit her, never complained. She just smiled, held my hand a little tighter, kissed me on the shoulder and said, "It's okay, I'm here for you, not for them." Still, I watched her dim. Each exclusion shaved a little spark from her eyes. She never said it, but I saw it. And somewhere deep down, I started to shrink too. I found myself editing stories when I talked to my parents, leaving Grace out of sentences, out of photos, out of life. Until one night, I came home and found her at the table. Dinner cold, her eyes distant. She didn't cry. That would have been easier. Instead, she just whispered, "I don't think your parents hate me. I think they're pretending I don't matter. And that's worse." I didn't sleep that night, because she was right. And for the first time in my life, I wondered what mattered more, being a son or being a man. It was during my father's birthday dinner, one of those stiff, upscale affairs where conversation came prepackaged with wine pairings, that everything cracked a little deeper. I had asked if Grace could join. My mother blinked, again. "Oh," she said. "I assumed she'd be busy." My father didn't even acknowledge the question, just raised his glass and toasted to family that matters. I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh, I'd scream. I stayed through dessert, my smile frozen, the way a good son does. But something in me began to rot that night. Back home, Grace was curled up on the couch with a book I had recommended. She always read the things I loved, even if they weren't her taste. She looked up and asked, "How was it?" I wanted to lie, say it was fine. But instead I dropped to my knees, laid my head in her lap, and whispered, "I'm sorry." She ran her fingers through my hair. Quiet, steady. "I don't want to be a secret," she finally said. "I want to be real." And there it was, the line I had tried to avoid, the truth I had buried under years of polite silence. A week later, I stopped returning my parents' calls. I told them I needed space. They didn't ask why. I guess they assumed it was just a phase, like Grace. But the distance gave me clarity. I started to see my own patterns, how I had let their coldness shape me, how I mistook their approval for love. I began to rewrite everything. Grace and I traveled. We built our life quietly, without fanfare, and I started to feel free. But then the call came, my mother's voice flat and professional. "Your uncle passed. The will is being read next month. You're expected." Expected, not invited. And just like that, I was back in their orbit, but this time I wasn't coming alone. Grace didn't flinch when I told her about the will reading. She just looked at me, really looked, and asked, "Are you sure?" I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. Because if I backed out now, I'd be giving them exactly what they always wanted. The version of me that stays quiet. That hides the woman I love in shadows. I wasn't that man anymore, not after everything we had built. So we planned. She picked out a soft navy dress, elegant, simple, powerful without trying. I remember watching her fasten her earrings and thinking, she deserves to be seen. The drive to my uncle's estate was long. Familiar roads blurred past, each one holding memories of childhood birthday parties, Christmas mornings, polite scoldings and long silences. Grace reached for my hand at one point and whispered, "You're not that little boy anymore." And I believed her, at least for a second. But when we pulled up to the old house, tall gates, perfect hedges, white columns that screamed legacy, my stomach twisted. I hadn't been back in years, but the air still smelled like control and clipped words. Nothing had changed. Inside, the family was already gathered, all the familiar faces pretending to mourn. My parents stood in the corner, composed as always, champagne flutes in hand. When they saw me, their expressions flickered, polite surprise turning into discomfort as their eyes landed on Grace. My mother's smile thinned, my father's jaw clenched. But they said nothing, not a single word, no hello, no acknowledgement, just a cold shift in energy, like someone had opened a window in winter. Grace stood taller beside me. She didn't shrink. She didn't fidget. She just reached for my arm and said, calmly, "Let's sit." And for the first time in my life, I didn't look to them for permission. The room hushed when the lawyer entered, a man with tired eyes and a thick folder, worn from years of handling secrets and expectations. He cleared his throat and began with the usual formalities, condolences, legal disclaimers. No one cried. No one even looked sad. This wasn't grief. It was anticipation. Everyone was there for one reason: inheritance. Titles, land, control. My uncle had no children of his own, but he was the oldest brother, the pillar, and everyone wanted a piece of what he left behind. I watched my cousins lean forward with thinly veiled hunger. My mother adjusted her posture like she was preparing for a photo. Grace, beside me, stayed still, quiet, calm, unreadable. Then came the names. One by one, assets were distributed. Paintings, antique watches, properties across the coast. My parents received the summer home they'd always wanted. A cousin got the vintage Porsche. There were murmurs of approval, stiff nods, air kisses. But then, the lawyer paused. His eyes scanned the room, then fell on me. "There is one final clause," he said, "regarding the trust fund and the scholarship endowment." That's when I felt the shift. Everyone turned, and I heard my father's throat tighten. The lawyer continued, reading my uncle's words verbatim. "To my nephew, the only one who ever came to visit without asking for something, I leave the educational trust in full administrative control of the new foundation. He may name it and run it as he chooses, and if he's wise, he'll share this with someone who taught him what family should truly mean." There was a beat of stunned silence. My mother's mouth opened slightly. My father looked like he had swallowed glass. And slowly, all eyes turned to Grace. She didn't blink. She didn't smile. But I felt her fingers tighten gently around mine. And in that moment, the silence in the room was louder than any scream. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The words "he may name it" echoed like a challenge, not just from my uncle, but from every version of myself that had once stayed quiet. My father shifted in his seat, his jaw ticking like a clock that had missed its cue. My mother clutched her handbag a little tighter. No one said it, but the message was clear. Don't do it. Stay polite. Stay loyal. I stood slowly. My knees didn't shake, maybe out of pride, maybe out of pain. I looked at the lawyer, then at the room filled with people who had never seen Grace, really seen her, and I cleared my throat. "I want to name the foundation," I said, my voice low but steady. "It will be called the Grace Initiative." A silence swept across the room, sharp and immediate. Not confused, but defensive. My mother's lips parted. My father looked away. A cousin scoffed softly. But I didn't stop. Because it was her, not any of you, who showed me what compassion looks like, what family sounds like when it's safe, what love feels like when it's earned. My throat tightened, but I kept going. I don't need your approval. I never did. But I'll honor the only person who stood beside me when you all chose to look the other way. Grace didn't move. She didn't cry. She just stared at me with that impossible, unwavering look. The one that said, I would have loved you, even if you hadn't chosen me. That was what broke me. Not the rejection, not the inheritance, not the icy glares, but her quiet, unshakable dignity. I sat down beside her. No applause, no warm embraces, just the thick, stunned air of a room watching its own power shift. And for once, I wasn't afraid of what came next, because I had already chosen my family, and this time, I said it out loud. No one clapped. Of course they didn't. This wasn't a celebration, not for them. My father crossed his arms, leaned back, and fixed his gaze on the ceiling as if pretending I no longer existed. My mother's face hardened into porcelain, flawless, frozen, unreadable. My cousins whispered behind manicured fingers, their murmurs slithering like snakes across the room. But I didn't flinch. I sat beside Grace with both hands on my lap, breathing in the silence like armor. Because for the first time, I realized something. Their discomfort was not my burden. It was their reflection, and I had stopped living inside it. The lawyer closed the folder and began collecting papers, but before leaving, he paused. Your uncle, he said. He asked me to give you something privately. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name, written in the unmistakable spidery script I remembered from childhood birthday cards. I slipped it into my coat pocket, not ready to open it under so many watching eyes. But I felt the weight of it, heavier than it looked. Grace and I stood, nodded politely, and turned to leave. No one followed us. No one stopped us, not even to say goodbye. That night, back at home, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, neatly folded. My uncle's handwriting, direct, sharp, warm in its own way. They'll never see her. But I did, and I saw you too. I knew the boy you were. I knew the man you could be. This gift isn't about money. It's about voice. Use it. Loud or soft. Just make sure it's yours. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I passed the letter to Grace, who read it without blinking. She folded it again, kissed the paper gently, and said, Then let's build something that speaks louder than silence. And I nodded, not as a son, but as the man I had finally become. The weeks that followed were quiet, not empty, but intentional. Grace and I sat side by side at the kitchen table, surrounded by notes, sketches, coffee mugs, and old memories reimagined as blueprints. The Grace Initiative was born not from grandeur, but from grit. We didn't want it to feel elite. We wanted it to feel like breath, the kind you take after holding it too long. Scholarships for students like Grayson who had been overlooked, mental health programs, safe spaces for those made invisible in rooms where titles mattered more than character. The foundation grew, not fast, but strong. And with every step, her name was no longer just whispered in my heart. It echoed. We launched with a modest event. Nothing glamorous, just real stories, warm lighting, music Grace loved. And people showed up. People who believed in what we were building. People who had never known Grace, but now wanted to. Slowly, the initiative made headlines. Quiet ones. Thoughtful ones. Built on dignity, one article said. Another read, A legacy rooted in love. My parents, of course, remained silent, but I knew they saw it. They always kept up appearances, and appearances always included staying informed. When the first scholarship was awarded in Grace's name, I received a short text from my mother. Noted. That was all. 2 syllables. But they landed with more weight than any lecture, and I smiled. Because this time I wasn't seeking their approval. I wasn't shrinking for their comfort. The boy who used to edit his joy out of family dinners was gone, and in his place stood a man who had built something that didn't need permission to exist. Graco, watching me read the text, just raised an eyebrow and said, "They can note it, but they can't unwrite it." I laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that comes from healing, the kind that tastes like truth. We were just getting started, and the story wasn't about them anymore. It was about what happens when you name love and refuse to hide it. It came in a pale cream envelope, hand-addressed in my mother's signature calligraphy, the kind usually reserved for charity galas and high society luncheons. Inside, an invitation. Family dinner, formal attire, Saturday, 8 p.m. No mention of Grace, no apology, no explanation, just a line at the bottom. We would like to reconnect. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe it, to think that maybe, finally, the walls had cracked, that they had seen the light we built and wanted to step into it. But I had learned the hard way. Some doors don't open. They only close more quietly. Grace saw the envelope on the counter. She didn't ask. She just said, "You don't owe them a scene, but you also don't owe them your peace." That line settled in my chest like a stone, and I knew what she meant. We didn't need their validation. Not anymore. Still, curiosity has a pulse, and wounds, even healed, sometimes itch. So I went, alone, just to see. The house hadn't changed. Same portraits, same piano, same coldness tucked under expensive rugs. My parents greeted me with practiced smiles. They poured wine. They spoke of weather, stocks, travel. For 20 minutes, why they didn't mention Grace. Until my mother finally asked, "How's your foundation?" There it was. Not her name, not her story. Just your foundation, like it had sprouted from nowhere. I answered calmly. "It's thriving. Grace has been incredible. She runs the community outreach now." My mother nodded tightly, but her lips pressed into disapproval. My father cleared his throat. "Some feel the name is unorthodox." I smiled. "It's not meant for them. It's meant for people who never had names on buildings." Silence fell again. This time, heavier. I finished my drink, stood up, and said, "Thank you for dinner." As I reached the door, my mother whispered, "She's changed you." I turned back. "No," I said. "She let me be who I always was." Then I walked out, and I didn't look back. A week after that cold dinner, Grace and I drove to the coast, the same one where my uncle once took me as a boy, long before expectations hardened my voice. The cliffs were still there, battered and wild. The wind carried the same salt. But something had changed. Me. Us. We walked in silence for a while, hand in hand, letting the ocean speak instead. Grace stopped near a wooden bench overlooking the water. It had a small plaque now, new, polished. I leaned in. "In memory of those who saw before others did." Below it, in smaller letters, "Donated by the Grace Initiative." My throat tightened. We had come full circle, not by design, but by truth. I had spent most of my life chasing shadows in my parents' house, trying to matter inside walls that only echoed when I stayed quiet. But now, her name was carved into places they would never erase. Her love was stitched into futures we'd never meet. And I, once silent, once ashamed, had found a way to speak. Grace sat down on the bench, the wind teasing her hair, and looked up at me. "You still think naming the foundation after me was too much?" I shook my head. It wasn't enough. Because how do you measure someone who rebuilds the pieces of you others ignored? How do you thank someone who turned exile into belonging? You don't. You honor them. You name what they gave you. You let the world remember, even if your family tries to forget. We sat there as the sky burned orange, and I realized something. This wasn't revenge. Not really. It was recognition. It was choosing to define love not by who accepted it, but by who never abandoned it. And in that, I had won something my parents would never hold: peace. Years passed, not suddenly, but in small, beautiful ways. The foundation grew, like a quiet forest. One scholarship became 5, then 20. Students we had never met wrote letters to Miss Grace, thanking her for making them feel seen. Some said they had almost given up. Others said her story gave them hope. We framed the first letter and hung it in our hallway. Not for show, for remembrance. Because every time we walked by, we were reminded that what we built was real, not loud, not flashy, but enduring. My parents never visited, never donated, never called to ask how it was going, and I stopped needing them to. One afternoon, we attended a graduation. A young woman, the first in her family to finish college, stood on stage. She spoke of her journey, of being invisible, underestimated, discarded. Then she paused and said, "Someone once told me that love doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. That's what the Grace Initiative gave me, not just funding, but belief." The crowd clapped. Grace pressed a hand to her chest. I turned to her. She had tears in her eyes, not from pain, but from recognition, the kind that tells you, you mattered. As we walked out into the sun, someone approached us. A teenager, nervous, holding a folded piece of paper. "Are you her?" they asked Grace. She smiled. "Sometimes," she said gently. "But today, I think you are." And I watched as she handed them the moment I had once given her. Dignity. That was the final gift. Not the trust fund, not the legacy, but the ability to pass it forward, quietly, powerfully. I never needed revenge. What I needed was voice, and by saying her name when others wouldn't, I found mine. Thank you for watching until the end. If you've ever lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the loudest impact is made in silence.